Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Shahad Murshid,
And I'm
and
Ahmed.
today we're going to be explaining the How to Renal talk for those of you that couldn't attend. Now, we want to start off by just telling you quickly what worked for us in renal and that didn't work for us in previous blocks. For me personally, I stopped taking notes and instead I started to annotate on the slides. This proved to be it was very much more time efficient for me. I wasn't wasting time making notes and then I couldn't go back to study them. Now, obviously, if taking notes works for you, this is not to discourage you or make you question your study methods. If it works for you, it works for you. That's the first thing that I changed. The second thing that I changed was I started to do practice questions more actively. Now, I highly recommend you guys do this. When you do practice questions, just make sure that you understand all the options, understand why each one is correct, and why like the correct answer is correct and why the incorrect options are incorrect. Read the explanation if you have to, ask your friends. Just don't move on from the question until you really understand it. And if you feel like your studying was flawed in any way, that's totally fine. Just go back to the lecture and you can touch up on anything that you may have missed. Last but not least is I learned how to manage my time, make time for myself, my friends, my family, and I learned to have a balance. So instead of having 8-hour study sessions with no breaks and having them be completely unproductive with just no discipline, and I procrastinated a lot and I didn't get much done in 8 hours. Whereas during a 4-hour study session, I was able to accomplish so much more. So just remember that studying is not about quantity, it's about quality. So these are the things that worked for me personally. Now, Reem?
Now, for me, my experience with the renal, what was different with renal, I would say I have changed 5 things that pushed me to do better in renal. First and foremost, I have found a new way to study in which I'm not cramming everything the week of the renal final. I know a lot of people like to cram, they don't find the time and everything because of other courses, but honestly, finding a way to study in which you're not cramming can um, make more room for your other courses. It makes you it has you be caught up with the reading lectures as much as you can. Personally for me, I used to write notes more efficiently, unlike Shahad. She didn't really like the notes, but for me, I don't think I could study without writing notes. Now, second thing I have changed is managing my time better. And that again just falls under studying day by day and being caught up as much as I can, just to leave as much room as possible for the other courses because again, your final exams are very, very close together. So it's important to create room and to create time for other courses as well. Now, the third thing I have changed is prioritizing my time and prioritizing my study session. Um, Honestly, all I can say here is eliminating the distractions you might have, being able to actually focus when you have your study sessions, not procrastinating as much as you used to is very, very important because you need as much focus as you can in one study session. Because as Shahad said, it's all about quality and not quantity. As much information as you can take in just a short period of time is way better than just sitting for a longer period of time and not being productive at all. And the last thing I want to mention is sleep. And I cannot stress this enough. I know how like sleep deprived we are as students and everything, and I completely understand that. But I'm talking about sleep the night of the exam, and I really don't care how much you crammed, how much you didn't study, how much you just didn't review enough. Sleeping at least 4 to 5 hours is very essential before your exam, as it helps you retain the information you like studied the night of the exam, but then you also go into the exam refreshed and with energy. Unlike me, I used to always sleep in the middle of my exams if I go as an all-nighter. So sleeping before the exam is very, very crucial. It's very, very important as it gives you a little bit more energy. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the actual part of the talk.
Okay, now for the contents of this talk, we're going to start off with a block overview. So this block is 3 weeks long. 2 of those weeks are online. So it may be hard for you to attend or stay focused and stay caught up, but please just try to study day by day. It's very important for you to stay caught up since you do have your renal and mole finals before your you have your mole and genetics finals before your renal final. So try to stay caught up as much as possible. Studying day by day is very crucial for this block. Next, you have 3 credit hours, which is just the number of count the weightage that it has on your GPA is 3 hours. For your assessments, you have 2 TBLs, which are 5% in total. And since they are only 2, try to do well in them as they will help increase your final grade. And they'll help you stay caught up day by day, week by week. And for your final, it is 95%. Obviously, you don't have a midterm. Next is the renal survival guide.
Now, for the survival guide, any study guide that anyone may have should have at least 3 of these 5 things. First study, a second study, and practice questions. If your study guide does not include these, I highly recommend that you change how you study and fit these 3 in them. But I wanted to add just a little bit more. So the first point is attending the lectures or watching the recording. And here I specifically mean being attentive in the lecture. Not only does it help you actually retain some information, it helps you introduce to the topic. It helps you get introduced to the topic. It makes it a little bit easier for you to actually get into first study because you have attended the lectures and have been attentive in the lectures. So attending lectures is very, very crucial, as also sometimes we never know what can happen with the recording. So it's always safer to just attend the lectures. Now, for the first study is when you basically introduce yourself to the specific lectures that you are studying. Now, the first study is always the hardest step to actually start, and that's okay. But once we start it, everything else goes as smooth as it is. But specifically, what I want you to do in a first study is whatever source you use, if it's a checklist or if it's Notion, whatever it is, whenever you're studying the lecture, and it's a lecture that you haven't really done as well as you wanted to do it, always marking it or putting a little marker next to that specific lecture you haven't done well can really help you when you go over it for a second study, because you can actually give it its time, the actual attention it needs. Because first study, as I said, you're just being introduced to the topic again. And then moving on to second study. Second study is a study where you actually try to solidify the information in your head. You're being reintroduced to whatever you have studied already, and you're actually trying to memorize it, understand it better. You go back to the lectures that were marked by you to try to give them more attention, to try to study them better. All of that just falls under second study. It's very, very crucial to at least have gathered 95% of the information here. And always follow up with practice questions. Practice questions are technically a source of review. I view them that way. I view them sometimes as a third study as well, because not only are they a source of review, but then they also help uncover your weaknesses. It helps you uncover what you haven't done well, what you have done well throughout your first and second studies. It can just help you learn more. You can go back to the lecture again. All of that just falls under practice questions. It's always practice questions over reviewing the content for the millionth time. And last but not least, a dump sheet or notes review. Now, here it's basically just like whatever you like, opening up a page, whether it's on your iPad or an actual paper, writing down whatever it is you think is important, writing down whatever it is that needs memorization, that needs to be mentioned more than once. Writing it down on a dump sheet is always good, especially that you guys have a lot of transporters, you guys have a lot of equations, always writing them down based off of memory or based off of recall is very, very important. Now moving on to doctors and disciplines, we're going to be starting off with anatomy. So we have Dr. Atif and Dr. Elena. No one really strange to us. I think with Dr. Atif, you guys took 2 lectures already. So you guys have 1 more with him. And my only advice is attend his lectures. Be attentive as much as you can, because he tries to make the session like so interactive. He explains on slides that aren't mentioned or aren't being put out in the actual slides that are being sent out to the batch. So I think that's very important, as well as I don't think Dr. Atif allows you to record his lectures. So it's always better, safer to attend his lectures. And whenever you need extra information, whether it's from Dr. Elena's side or Dr. Atif's side, you can always view his YouTube channel. They're very short, they're very cute. You can always go back to them at any time. Now, for Dr. Elena, she explains the majority of anatomy. She honestly explains in such a nice way and in such an incredible way that when you do attend the lecture, walking out of the lecture, you would know at least 75% of it based on her explanation. So walking out with that much information in your head really, really helps you tackle first study. It really, really helps you understand the majority of the anatomy lecture, especially if you have lab right after. She always puts these practice checkpoints in between her lecture to make sure that you're still on the right track with her. And I need you to focus on the bold and highlighted points she puts in her lectures, because I guarantee you almost 98% of the time she gets them in the exam. So focusing on those are very, very important.
Now, moving on to the bulk of this block, which is physiology. The majority of it is taught by Dr. Shams. Now, obviously, you guys know his slides already. They're very, very good. His notes section is extremely comprehensive, usually explains everything that you need to know perfectly, that you don't really need to know. You don't really need external resources. Even the way that he explains during the lecture, he gives you like analogies, he tells you stories that really help the information stick. Now, obviously, if you do feel like you need any supplementary resources, you can use Ninja Nerd's Renal Physiology playlist. It is very helpful. I personally used it to study before I studied the actual lecture. I would watch the video, get an overview of it, and it would really help me visualize and get into the lecture having sort of an idea of it. So if you want to do that, that is also an option. Next is the graphs. So this is an example of one of the graphs that you guys have in your lectures. It is honestly, when you see it, you don't think it's important, and then you'll get questions about it. So if you see graphs, don't ignore them. Instead, annotate on the slides or transcribe as he's explaining the graph, because the graph will tell you everything that you need to know about the previous slides. They're usually summaries of the previous slides. And even for me, when I feel like I ever need to go back to a piece of information, or if I need to refresh my knowledge on something, I will literally just take a look at the graph and it tells me everything that I need to know. So don't sleep on the graphs. This is one of the graphs that he asked in one of his practice questions. So, you know, it's important. Moving on, we have transporters. So since you guys took transporters in GIT, now you will be reintroduced to even more transporters in renal. Now, for renal transporters, they are taught in such a way where you have different segments of the nephron. And by the way, most of the transporters are in 2 lectures, tubular functions 1 and 2. And you'll have different segments of the nephron, like the proximal convoluted tubule, the early distal tubule. Each one has its own transporters, their own functions, its own name. And this is an example of how I used to study them. These are my notes for it. I would draw it out exactly how it is in the lecture, with the tubular fluid on one side, the blood on the other side, all of the different transporters, the ions going in and out, the names of the transporters, any extra information that he says about the transporters, I would add them. And I know I said I stopped taking notes, but for these 2 lectures, it's honestly so helpful just having them all in one place instead of all of like widespread throughout 2 whole lectures, and it gets overwhelming and it becomes really hard to study. So having them here is really helpful, like all in one page. By the way, if you want my notes, you can just text me. My number is at the end and I'll send them to you. Now, moving on to equations. So for equations, you do have a significant amount of equations in renal where you will be asked questions about them. So make sure you study them well, make sure you memorize them, do practice questions on them, write them all down on a piece of paper if you have to. Just make sure that you know how to solve these questions because in my opinion, they're like easy free marks to get in the exam because they don't require any critical thinking. All they really require is that you apply the equation and you get your answer. Next is his weekly practice questions that he sends. Please, please, please make sure you do them. They are very helpful. They're obviously from his slides. So after you've studied his lectures, you should be able to do his questions. Now, a lot of people have said that the questions were harder than his actual questions in the exam. So if you do find that, don't be discouraged. I still would recommend you do his questions though, because if you know how to solve his questions, then inshallah you'll be able to solve his exam questions. Last but not least is Ibrahim al-Adaybi's notes and Quizlet. Now, you've probably heard me talk about his Quizlets before. I've always used them and I always recommend them. But for renal physiology specifically, I used them a lot for every single lecture. I would study it and then I would do the Quizlet for it. Now, obviously, if you're more of an Anki person, the equivalent to that would be Anki. Just doing flashcards after the lecture is really helpful because it sort of fills in any gaps in your knowledge, or it helps you like know any pieces of information that you may have not focused on before. So doing the Quizlet is extremely helpful. Now, for his notes, I used them for a review before the exam instead of going through the lectures. I would just go through his notes. Now they are handwritten, which I know a lot of people don't prefer, but they're super helpful. They have everything that you need to know. And I linked both of these at the end of this presentation. Next is Dr. Abdul Ahad. Now for Dr. Abdul Ahad, he only teaches 2 lectures and his lectures are always very straightforward. His teaching style is very straightforward. His slides are simple and his questions are really easy. So yeah, nothing really to say about Dr. Abdul Ahad. Now, for histology and embryology, usually these are the subjects that are usually crammed and just left till the end of the block, and I completely understand that. But for histology specifically, it actually helps you understand the physiology so much. I know for me personally, I could not get myself to start studying physiology because I didn't understand it. Like it was just not making sense to me. And physiology is usually, you start learning it and it's assumed that you know the histology of it or you know the structure of the nephron before you study the actual physiology of what goes on inside the nephron. So studying the histology before the physiology is actually really helpful and it will make your physiology studying way faster and easier. So I actually recommend you do that and not ignore histology. There are only 2 lectures, so might as well just study them. And they're taught by Dr. Ani. Her slides are always enough to study from. And if she sends you a review PowerPoint, I recommend you study it. Now for Dr. Paul, whatever method that you've used in the past for embryology, just continue using it. Renal is the exact same as other blocks, either transcribe, annotate on the slides, make notes, use previous batch's notes or your current batch's notes. Whatever you do, just don't depend on the PowerPoints alone because they don't include everything that you have to know. And he does emphasize a lot during the lecture what he's going to ask in the exam. And 10 out of 10 times, he will bring those things in the exam. So make sure you don't just study his PowerPoints, either attend or watch the recording. One of these is definitely essential for Dr. Paul. Moving on to Renal Labs.
Finally, Renal Labs. We're back to the labs as usual, back to visualizing things now. For Renal Labs, I have mainly three things I want to tackle. First thing is the mandatory Renal Labs that you have every week. Now, I think you guys have only 3 labs this block, two of which are going to be obviously information, and the third one would probably be a review. Now, attending them is very, very crucial because it obviously helps you in your OSCE. And TAs help just visualizing and orienting yourself around the kidneys, around the structures around the kidneys, specific things that they will ask about in the OSCE is very, very important. So it's always best to orient yourself, ask around, whether it's your TAs or your friends, whatever it is, ask around. And specifically what I used to do before my labs is my labs usually be on Tuesdays. So whatever anatomy content we took on Sundays and Mondays, I would prepare myself beforehand by studying them. And so I could like walk into the lab knowing almost what's going to be in the lab. Not only would that help me not to be lost, but then it also boosts my confidence. Whenever the TAs would ask questions, you can help your friends around if they feel lost. Just all of that usually just like really helps you out. And not only are you done with the like lab content, the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I want to say is evening labs. Now, I know a lot of people don't really attend them anymore. People think it's a waste of time and everything, but honestly, I think it's a really good way to review whatever you had already taken in lab. And it prepares you for stuff you haven't taken yet. And it's like a really good, like, it's kind of like you're reviewing everything all over again because it's stuff you've basically already taken and you're just orienting yourself. You're checking the structures out again, just getting used to the models, the cadavers they have, and just very, very important again for OSPE. You never know what's going to happen with specific models and cadavers we have. And the third thing is lab committee. Now, lab committee, we all know that they collect everything that was taught in lab and put them in a PowerPoint. And honestly, I think they're very important and very useful when it gets to your OSPE exams. And from what I know, your OSPEs are on a separate day from your MCQs and SAQs. So always giving yourself the time to actually open up the lab committee and actually checking out what was taught in lab is a good refresher to like see what the lab content was and everything. And yeah, that's it for Renal Labs.
Okay. So for resources, these are just the resources that we recommend you focus on. For physiology, Dr. Shams's is probably the #1 most important one. And medical physiology Q&A is also extremely helpful and high yield. So, and for anatomy, BRS is very helpful as Dr. Alina brings questions from it. And you have Michigan for Dr. Atif's questions. For histology and embryology, your best bet is just to study the past exams. No need for any external resources, obviously. And yeah, these are just all of the good books in general. You can just look through them if you want to. Now, for other resources, the academic aid mock exam is really helpful to test out your knowledge, to know where you stand in the lecture and what you need to focus on more, what you need to retouch on. I really, really recommend the mock exams. Now, for your exam committee, obviously every resource that I mentioned earlier is going to be collected by the exam committee in a weekly file. And so instead of wasting your time just going through all of the books, just study from the exam committee file and it should be, now the growth and development PAL sessions, I like to use them as a second study because it is taught by students. So obviously they know how to study the lecture. They know the struggle, the hard parts in the lecture, and they will relate it to you in a way that is more simplified. And it will really help you. Obviously, you can text them after the lecture or email them, and they're always super, super helpful. So highly recommend past sessions as a resource.
Okay, so this is what a question would look like. Honestly, all you can take from this slide is none of the questions are really hard. All you need to know is to be able to dissect the question, and this question is definitely just asking you what transporter is found in a segment of the nephron and what drug works on it. Purely a recall question, nothing really that you need to know. And the answer is E. But yeah, that's really it for the talk. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys benefit from this. If you guys need anything, you guys can text us via WhatsApp, or email, or just stop us at university. It doesn't really matter. Please scan these QR codes and just try to see if this can help you out. And I really hope that they help you out. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoy this block as much as Reem and I have. And please, if you ever need any questions, don't hesitate to text us or stop us in the university. We're very happy to help, and we love this block. We love talking about it. So if you ever need anything, please talk to us. And thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.